Hello, beautiful people. Happy Monday. I have a message for dads of boys and young men in this conversation with Sarah Poet. And what I want to say is that the porn that you might have probably experienced as a teenager and a young man, and that you might experience now, is categorically different than the porn that your teen is experiencing now. And the reasons for that are threefold: high-speed internet, smartphones, and teenage brain development. So the first two contribute to the third. And the reality is that when a young teen is watching porn through high-speed internet on their smartphone, that their brain is actually being wired in a way that yours is not, because of where they're at in their developmental stage. And this cocktail that young men are growing up in of the internet and porn can have really damaging effects on young men. For instance, did you know that this is the first time in history that erectile dysfunction and sexual dysfunction are widespread among young men? If you talk to people that do sex therapy, they will tell you that one of their primary clientele right now are young men that are sexually dysfunctional. And there's a wide possible range of reasons for that, but part of it is definitely pornography. So I'd love to talk about that more with Sarah Poet here.
Hello.
So, hi, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited to hear you and your passion about this topic. So Andrew and I are both former educators, both passionate about teens and teens coming into healthy self-identity. And Andrew last week was like, I'm so fired up. I got to talk about porn. We have to talk about porn. And so, I've been preparing for this, honestly, because it's such a big topic. It's such a big topic. And teens and sexuality, it's just such an important topic, and at the base of how we all relate to one another, and so this topic of porn and teenagers having the accessibility to it so readily these days. I'm sure even more right now, since everyone's looking at devices so much more in COVID. And it's changing brain chemistry. It's changing the way kids relate to one another sexually, what they expect of one another and of themselves. So huge topic. That's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like, whoa, big topic that we're embarking on here. I want to say personally, I'm not a sex educator. I want to name that. I'm really passionate about teaching young women how to know their own yes and their own no in their body, in their mind, and how to speak that and hold that in the voice. Because one of the other cultural side effects of this is that more boys do look at porn than girls. And there's implications in the culture where girls feel like, well, I just have to go along with whatever he wants to do. Not that that's new culturally, but they're being persuaded to even put their own, sex lives on the internet and that kind of thing. And so I work with women of all ages. I work with any human, but I primarily work with women of all ages to know how to hold the truth of the body and the truth of that moment. And so that's the angle that I'm coming from in this. And I'm also the mother of a 12-year-old son. And for those who are new to our series, I have 15 years in education with adolescents. So this topic was definitely covered, but I hired other professionals to come in and teach sexuality. But last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it back to you, is, both of us are very passionate about, there's a way that we've been doing sex ed, in our culture. And then there's like a new way to do sex ed. But I'm not sure that we're having conversations about how to cultivate genuine connection. And so I think that's one of the things that we wanted to cover here, is the beginning of that conversation too.
Yeah, I mean, sex ed basically went from don't do it to to do it, and it's fun and enjoyable. And what you need to know is the biology and safety and consent, right? And so it's like this pendulum shifted from like no, 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 no to yes, 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 right? And obviously, this is the cultural message that they're getting too. It's yes, yes, yes. And um, generally, what you have is young people who don't know themselves well enough to be involved, and there's so much pressure on them culturally to get sexually active early that it's a bit of a recipe for trouble, right? And there's not a lot of cultivation culturally or educationally in terms of the kind of emotional intelligence that's required to know oneself well enough to know what actual consent can look like in oneself or another, and not to mention any discussion of the deeper meaning of sexuality, right? And that they were playing with the most potent medicine, the most potent forces that exist on a biological plane, right? So this is obviously an immensely challenging, difficult thicket, and we're sending our kids out into the world really unprepared to navigate uh, these realities well.
Right. So would you say that most kids are learning about sexuality through exposure to porn and through their peers? Is
I
that
would
fair?
say the influences are media,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll include social media in that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Media, internet, and peers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so media and internet are tied together at some level, but
Mm-hmm.
these are the ways that they're learning about the world. They're not learning about it through thoughtful conversations with sexually mature adults who can, to whom they can ask safe questions, and to who can guide a group of young people to get deeper about their questions, right? And to it's quite rare, I would say, for those conversations to be really occurring.
Exactly. I mean, okay, so you and I, we worked in progressive schools, we ran progressive schools. Those conversations, I think, sometimes in the public charter that I worked in, the sex educator would be there and it was like, close the door and kids ask whatever you want, because it's rare that that can really happen. But yeah, I mean, this is extremely rare where we can have safe group conversations or like safe places where kids can ask adults. So let's just start with how parents can begin to interact with their teenage children. I'll say preteen to teen, because we want to start having these conversations before porn exposure is happening. Like we want to start talking about sex and consent and body image and self-love and all of those things way before the internet and porn and peers are influencing this direction. So what's some advice you have for parents?
Well, what a uh, what an important question. Uh, there's pleasure and pain are the great biological motivators, and I do think that there is a small place here for um, a statistic like this, particularly for young boys to hear. So, when sexual dysfunction occurs and it's related to pornography, the average 50-year-old man in abstaining from porn will recover sexual function in 2 months. All right. The average 20-year-old will take 4 to 5 months to recover once abstaining from sex. So think about that. How much less testosterone is in a 50-year-old man, and he can recover that much quicker, right? Because of it.
So I want
Yeah.
you to explain something else for listeners that I think is implied here, but I would love for you to go back and explain why would they be recovering sexual function? Thank you. Sorry, maybe you were going to say
Oh,
that next.
well, they'd be recovering sexual function because the the dopamine hits that are coming from pornography are, particularly for adolescents, are creating different pathways in the brain for what sexual pleasure looks like, and what it is, how it's experienced on a physiological level. You can't give a 20-year-old who's been watching too much porn Viagra to fix their erectile dysfunction, because the problem is not down there. The problem is up here. The brain has been wired differently because of excessive exposure to an incredible novelty of potential sexual partners, right, in rapid fire fashion, that are being objectified and used in an utterly decentralized, misogynistic way. And so imagine that a young boy who can walk into any bathroom anytime and have pornography on his phone in 5 seconds might have difficulty having a relationship with a woman, an actual woman.
Yeah.
So these young men are coming to therapists, and there's probably the greatest pain that actually drives men to reconsider their relationship to porn is sexual dysfunction, right? Nothing gets a man's attention like erectile dysfunction. Okay, so this is the first control group that we've had of people that the researchers can't actually find control groups of men that aren't exposed or use porn. So only people that have quit provide these control groups. And so an older man recovers sexual function more quickly, and the younger man takes much longer. Why? Because the young brain has actually been wired through this. This isn't being wired through Playboy magazines or a VHS tape like it might have been for me as a teenage boy. This brain is being wired for sexual pleasure and an understanding of what sexual, right, through high-speed internet, ubiquitous pornography, right? And it's a problem.
Yeah.
So what can parents do? That's one thing, is to you want to watch a room go silent, have a sex educator tell a group of teenage boys that they are risking their ability for intimacy and to have a penis that works by excessive porn consumption, right? You can talk about all the flowery stuff you want about the meaning of sexuality and this and that, and porn being misogynistic and the incredible destructive influences and objectification of women. But what gets a young man's attention is that a group of teenagers will go silent when that comes up, and it's like, oh, okay, this is maybe something I should pay attention to. So some kind of education. In general, I'm not a fear-based educator, right? But pleasure and pain are primary drivers and motivational forces in human life at a biological level. And I think the potential pain that is there with excessive pornography use for young men is something important to point out. And that's why older men, I think, might not understand the implications of their boys watching porn now and how different it is from their experience of porn as a teen. It is categorically different.
The other thing that's categorically different generationally also is fathers were probably outside more, getting their dopamine and serotonin from sports and playing in nature and working with their bodies, right? Which our young people right now are doing less of, maybe because of quarantine, but also just because screens divert their attention so much. And so I'm thinking generationally, there was more of a balance because they didn't have the smartphones, and yeah, they were just like finding the Playboy under dad's bed or something like that occasionally, or they were using like their imagination for their self pleasure, which is very different than looking at something that's inherently violent for self pleasure. But their brains were also getting longer stretches of time without the pornography, and the brains were getting the dopamine and serotonin from healthier means.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So this question of like, what can parents do? I mean, I think as always, creating a safe space. There's no shame. There's no shame in a young man wanting to explore and learn about what sexuality is. I mean, they've been bombarded with it since they were, 3 years old. Every movie has either the plot or the subplot about romantic love. Sexuality is tied up in all of these things, and as they start watching more and more adult level things, it just gets more and more. They know there's something here about sex,
Yeah.
right? And so learning about it. I was talking to a young man recently about porn, and he mentioned something that I hadn't thought about in forever. He's like, the penises are so big, and he like had done research, and he knew that the average porn star's penis was over 8 inches long, and the average man's penis was 5 point something inches long. And so as a young boy, they're learning, like, first of all, insecurities about themselves. They look down and they're like, I don't got that. And then they're learning unrealistic expectations of what a female body looks like, right? And so
And then
there's,
expectations of performance.
I mean, for sure.
Like, it's all about performance in porn.
Right. I mean, think about, and the essence of porn, right, is male fantasy. And that male fantasy is you put your big penis in some woman's hole. And again, I'm talking, this is a highly heteronormative conversation that I'm having. And I'm just going to own that that's what it is. Okay. So you put your penis in some woman's hole, and she loves it, right? She's like groaning and like is like overcome with pleasure just by you doing that. You don't have to, there's no hands, there's no kissing, there's no talk, there's no emotional connection. That's all it's about. And that is how to understand the sexual experience,
Yeah.
right?
Very dangerous. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So as the brain gets wired like that, it it becomes more and more difficult for young boys to really like understand how intimacy can actually happen with a woman, and how it does happen, and that what's being portrayed is so utterly unrealistic that it's when you consume that lack of realism at the level that porn is being consumed,
Yeah.
it becomes formative for how you think. And there's one other point I want to make about porn here, which is that cue that actually you put your penis in someone's hole and she moans in pleasure. The woman moaning in pleasure ought to be the cue that we pick up on for young men, of like, just know that actually that's what you're seeking, right? The question is how to get there. And porn is not showing you how to get there, right?
So
Because
you're saying like pleasuring the woman is a part of this, but we just need
absolutely,
to do it differently. You're saying teach boys that.
that's right. Porn would be uninteresting to a man if the woman was bored.
It's
No, the
true.
woman has to like it, right? So that part is the part that we like hone in on. Like, you see that, how the women, like, how the male fantasy is that the female actually likes this. Okay, well, let's talk about how that actually happens, right? And maybe that's your cue here to talk about like women and their, the relationship between sex and pleasure and the formation of young women and their sexuality.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I actually had one more thing to say about boys. I mean, I think we're focusing on boys because more boys are looking at porn than girls. So I just want to say one more thing about like boys and media and masculinity. And we've touched on this in other talks, and it's a really big topic. But how we are raising aware young men and aware young men around sexuality is just, it's so important. It's such a huge topic, and we don't have cultural examples in the media that I know that my son consumes. He watches a lot of movies at dad's house and a lot of, like older movies, like 80s movies and things like that. But he and I have been watching this show, and I'm watching it with him in part so that we can have conversations about human relationships, because we can use media as those archetypal conversations. And, there's not an example of masculinity in the shows that we've been watching that is like, yes, that man is in his full honor of the woman. Or, there's one character in the show that was very interested in the woman, and he's very, very academically high achieving. And so when he goes into his academic brain, he's very high performance, like you want to listen to him. But I said, did you notice how he interacts with women? He doesn't stay in his integrity, and he just kind of chases them around like he just wants the sex. And my son's like, yeah. But, I'm like, we don't have these cultural examples, definitely not widespread. And I would have to think like harder and do a lot of research for where the cultural examples are for young men around masculinity and sexuality combined. I don't know if you have anything to add to that right now.
I don't, just for sure that, media, movies, pop
Yeah,
culture, songs, they are the ones educating our children.
right.
Pornography is educating our children about sexuality, uh, and I think we want more for
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
that's a big tall order for parents, right? Most of them are not equipped or willing or interested even having that conversation, and teens are often even less interested in having that conversation with their parents.
yeah,
So it's all
yeah,
about, again, creating that emotionally safe space for that conversation, for the space for questions. If you find your kid watching porn on the internet, the last thing you'd want to do is shame them,
right,
right?
right,
So
right. Yeah, this morning, getting in the mindset of preparing for this conversation and thinking about this, I was asking my son some questions, and his eyes kind of got big, and he's listening. And I said, "Are you open to?" I said, "Do you want to talk about this?" He said, "I don't want to talk about it." I said, "Are you opening to listening? And are you open to listening?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "4 minutes?" He said, "Yeah," because he does want the information. He wants the information. um, and like I said, I want to give it to him before he's doing an internet search on it or finding it online somewhere. um, there are a couple of points that I was thinking about going back to. You had asked about young women, and I don't know if there's one specific thing that you want me to talk about, but I think, culturally, my mind goes like big and cultural a lot of the time. As you know, you're laughing because um, but we have thousands of years of indoctrination around women being quieter about preferences and quieter about needs. Now, I see a lot of young people who are much more sure of themselves than I was at that age. And I think, and I look at my son, and he sure is. He's like, I'll do what I want, way, way more comfortable like that. But I know a fair amount of teenagers that have females that have gotten themselves into sexual activity because they felt pressure. I think it's really freaking common. And so teaching girls, how to be empowered. First of all, what situations are you letting yourself physically be a part of? But then, where do you know the yes and no in your body? And how do you take things slow when there might be social pressure? um, how do you make a decision that's for you when you think, oh well, if this boy with this inherent status symbol wants me, then this is going to improve my social relationships and things like that. So I want young girls, I want every young person working on their self-identity to go inside, like what is actually true for me right now. Do I actually want to go through with this sexual act? do I, you know, have I really thought about this, or am I being spontaneous? Um, and we've been talking about teaching kids mindfulness and teaching the self-awareness and the ability to ask yourself that question. It's almost like you can watch yourself from above, like, okay, what am I doing right now? Am I really okay with what I'm doing right now? Do I want to keep going down this road, or do I want to decide differently? And having that meta awareness where you can like pause and regulate and check in with your authentic self and then make an empowered decision. um, that's what I want kids to do.
Yeah, and absolutely, absolutely, right? I mean, like, this the basis of consent is knowing oneself enough in that moment to be able to give consent. And the reality is that the biological impulse for sex is very strong. So tuning in, I like to tell, I like to teach, say, how like what seemed like a good idea when you set your alarm clock for why you were going to get up, all of a sudden doesn't seem like such an important reason when the alarm clock actually goes off in the morning, right? It's the same with sex, right? You're like, oh, this seems like this reasoning will make sense. And then you're in the heat of passion, and all of a sudden, what seems like a good reason changes because there's different things going on in your body, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I think is really important to teach teens, in addition to the mindfulness and body awareness, is that if you're not prepared to have the hard conversations with a potential sexual partner beforehand about every aspect of sex, right? From, again, in a heteronormative sense, from accidental pregnancy to STD to the emotional, what parents and family relationship is to this, what one's religious values or values that one's been brought up with, and how doing this might, what kind of conscience one might have about this. If one isn't willing or able to have this conversation beforehand, then one is absolutely not ready to play with the most potent, dangerous fire that has been bestowed to human beings, right, on a biological level.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I think is important for, and I think so when you tell teens that, like, that's something that can sink in. Okay, am I ready to have these conversations? And if I'm not, then maybe I'm not ready, right? And the other thing that I like to tell teens about this topic is that the right sex is sex you can enjoy before, during, and after,
Mm.
right? And the problem is you don't know that until you've already engaged in it. But let's say you have, and then you're like, did that really feel good? Not in the moment, but as I reflect on the emotional aspects of that experience, do they sit well with me, or am I panged by something about that didn't feel right, that is not sitting right with me, that I'm now feel like I'm in conflict with myself or my parents or my own values, or, and if that the sex might be the right sex if you can enjoy it before, during, and after. So these are just some little phrases that I like to use with teens when talking about
Mm.
sexuality.
Mm. Mhm. And I just want to say potentially the obvious here, but part of the reason that we are having these talks is because we both work with teens, and teens are far more likely to have conversations with other adults than they are with their own parents most of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time. And so providing safe space for your teen to have some of these conversations about like the impulse, the why, the turn on, is it porn? Is it, and with girls, like, why am I consenting? Why am I saying yes? Am I doing it because when I check in with me, it's an absolute yes? Or am I doing it for social approval? Am I doing it because I hope he acts a certain way afterward? Big one.
Because my social conditioning has been so strong to
Yeah,
that my identity and value as a young woman is deeply tied up with what kind of sex object I am,
that's right.
right? And just I think they know that unconsciously, but to even just bring that to consciousness and
Exactly.
just point out, like what ideas of who you are
Yeah.
have been given to you without your consent. You didn't consent to these ideas being given to you, but that you've been bombarded with them,
Yeah.
right? And so getting to a deeper level of authenticity requires unpacking that stuff a little bit. I would love to do a a Zoom group for parents interested in this, like a 6 week or something, like workshop in the evenings for conversation about teens and sexuality.
Mm.
And then the other thing that's been on my mind is, I would not want to do this on Zoom, only want to do this in person, is doing a deeper kind of sexuality and intimacy identity workshop with teens, that meets either multiple times, right, for this kind of deeper level of sex ed, because we haven't even gotten to the issues of, or the deeper philosophical meaning of sexuality. And I think that any conversation about sex has to, yes, take in biology and and consent and STDs and pregnancy and these things, and it also needs to move. The conversation about consent is really interesting and needs to move into deeper emotional, um,
Yeah.
personal awareness and intrapersonal emotional intelligence, and then interpersonal intelligence and communication. And
Mhm.
then I think there also needs to be a deeper framework of what it is that we're talking about. Like, what is the relationship between, sexuality and your identity? Like, what is sex? Right? I mean, this is the creative force that we have been bestowed. And it
Yeah.
is the closest in that sense that we can come to to being divine creators. I mean, we are actually capable of creating life through this act, and and if we don't go to that level of the a sacred dimension of sexuality. And again, I think one here speaks purely from one's own perspective. If one says, look, this is what I've come to believe based on my background experience about sex, you can figure it out. You're going to figure it out on your own. But it's important that I think some adults are sharing these perspectives with kids to just move the pendulum a little bit away from the really perverse cultural influences that kids are getting, right, towards hopefully a healthier sense of sexuality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to make sure to communicate one thing that's been on my mind since you were talking about pleasure and pain before we wrap up. And when when one engages, when a young male especially engages with porn, like you were talking about before, at such a high rate that there is like erectile dysfunction, or they're not getting the immediate hit, right? Because porn becomes a potential addiction in the brain. And then there is like, well, it's not coming as easily anymore. It's not coming as easily anymore. And they're looking at the images that defile women in many ways and perpetuate misogyny in many ways. And there's an increased frustration. I'm speaking typically here or generally or potentially. There's an increased frustration that that pleasure doesn't come as easily. And then that is when people are going to begin to seek pain or to inflict pain. And so I read one statistic that said the average age of the first offense of a sexual offender is ages 15 to 16. And I don't know the gender, I don't know that that stat was gender specific. But we do know that more boys are using more porn than girls, and that well, I don't need to generalize further there. But my point is, in a misogynistic culture, in a patriarchy in general, we're trying to raise conscious young men. and conscious young women, but we're trying to do masculinity differently. And so that threshold where pleasure, I'm seeking it, I'm seeking it, I'm seeking it, and if it's not here, it's not here, or in person, she's not doing exactly what I want, she's not performing like that girl was, she's not just bending over like in that porn. That's where the aggression gets in the door. That is a significant area where the aggression gets in the door. Well, if I can't have it like I was used to, and my brain wants the hit and my body wants the serotonin hit, then I'm just going to take it, right?
Yeah.
Dangerous. Yeah.
I mean, I watched a really cool TED talk that I actually posted on my Facebook page of this guy who quit porn, and one of the two reasons he gave were that his fantasies had become aggressive and violent.
Yeah.
And he said, these weren't in me. These were not in me. These came to me, right?
Yeah.
And just after spending a bunch of time thinking about this recently, I went to Pornhub and just scrolled down the thumbnails.
Mm.
Just scrolled down hundreds of thumbnails and just looked at it in an entirely new lens of like, what is being communicated by these thumbnails?
Yeah.
And yeah, the level of misogyny, aggression, violence is just sheer objectification of the female form to provide male pleasure, that females can be consumed for male pleasure,
Yeah.
is just, that's what is there, and there's so many other layers to it, the sex trafficking, the way that young women are lured into the porn industry and spit back out. I mean, there's just so many layers of
Sex
this.
trafficking of young people before the age of 18 is the biggest industry on the planet. I really want to say that. Like,
Wow.
it's the biggest. So this industry, there's a lot of money in this industry across the planet. And there are very, very powerful people in this industry. This is not something that everyone even wants to go away. Okay, so this is there because it serves some to have people and young people hooked on these things.
I mean,
So we're up against a lot. Yeah,
it's $100 billion industry, and it's
porn
an
is.
yeah, porn, and it's just,
Yeah.
it's making money on the perverse, really base instincts and desires of the human being. And I'm not an anti-porn advocate. I'm not a this is from the devil. I understand some people are, and you might be. I'm not that, but I see the incredible damage this industry does on so many levels, and that every time we click, we create more demand, right? Like every click contributes to, one fraction of sex trafficking somewhere, right? Or every click contributes to, 18-year-old girls in the United States being marketed to heavily in order to, hey, come make $1,000 a day working in this industry. So, this is another level I think to educate young people on. Is just like, hey, you're sitting in your room clicking, but your clicks have implications in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point about spirituality, and then thank you all so much for watching. There's engagement on this post right now. That's wonderful. If we can answer any questions for you or serve you or your children, please reach out. You brought up a spiritual point and said, I don't know what you think. And so, I just want to say, anytime there is a fragmentation between the human and the access to what is divine, which I would argue porn does or can do, there's a fragmentation around, I want to consume, I want to take, and I've been talking publicly about this consumer program, and so this is a part of it. Like, I see it, I want it, I'll take it. I see it, I want it, I'll take it. And so that is in my sacred practices, that would take you farther from your access to the divine. But I'll leave that at that.
Beautiful, Sarah.
Wonderful.
Such a fun conversation. So I'm so animated by it. I've been just really just thinking about this, reading about it, talking about it, listening to people, and I'm kind of excited to see what grows out of it, because I do think there's something really important here to move forward with, and I'm not sure exactly what it is yet.
Yeah, healthy sexuality in teens. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please. All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.